Okay, so it's time that we actually write some CSS. Very exciting. Before we do that though, we need to have some HTML that we can style. So I'm going to go ahead and in Sublime, make a new file, save it, just put on my desktop for now, and I'm going to call it aboutme.html. Use that little trick, get the skeleton, the boilerplate, and this is going to be a very simple page. I'm telling you now, it is not going to be beautiful when we're done here. We're just going to change some colors. We're just going over the basics of how all of this works together. So I'm just going to add an H1, about me, and then let's say an H4, my hobbies. Feel free to adapt this to yourself. Let's add a list and a few LIs. And let's do playing guitar, cooking, and origami. And save that file. Let's just double check. Let's open it up. Great. Here's our wonderful site that we're going to style. So before we start actually writing CSS, we have to decide where to put the CSS. And there are actually a few choices. So in the notes, there are two that I'm referencing on this page. And the first one, I'll tell you right now, is not a good idea. I'm showing it to you just so that you are aware for two reasons. One, this is the only way that you used to be able to style elements. Before separate style sheets and before CSS, you actually did this in every single element. So let me show you an example. If I want to make this first LI purple, I would say style, and then in the quotes, say color purple. And that will work, and this changes to be purple. So there is a problem though, which is if I want all three of these to be purple, I need to go ahead and duplicate this every time, which is a lot of work. And then if I decide, oh no, I want them to be green, then I need to go and change 3 different places to be green. And obviously that problem is much worse when you have hundreds of the same element with the same style on a given page. So this is a bad idea. And the other reason this is not a great idea is that we want to separate our HTML from our CSS. It's this idea of the separation of concerns. We want our CSS to be self-contained in its own file. We want our HTML to be its own file with just the structure. CSS is just the style. So right now this is kind of a weird blend of the two. So I'm going to get rid of that. And the other way in the notes is something called a style tag. So a style tag lets us write CSS syntax where we actually select things and we have the curly braces, which we couldn't do here. But what we can do is do this inside of an HTML document. So up in the head, if we go ahead and just create a tag called style, and we can give it this attribute type equals text / CSS. We can now write some CSS tags and selectors inside of here. So remember, we have, this is the general rule, selector, and then we have property inside the curly braces, and then value, and then a semicolon. So I'm going to comment this out. By the way, to do comments in CSS, use slash and the asterisk, and then asterisk and slash. So I'm going to leave this here, and let's start by changing the H1 to be purple. So the way that we write that, if we follow this pattern, we select it. So we're going to write H1, and again, we will be spending a lot of time on the different types of selectors. So right now we're learning about one called the element selector, which lets us select based off of an element type, which is H1. So now we're going to add a property in here. And in this video, we're just going to keep it extremely simple and use color. So I'll say color, and then purple. And save this. We load our page back up, and we get a purple H1. So the next thing that we can do is change all LIs to be orange. And to do that, we select with an element selector again, and we can just do this right after. We don't need any commas or any other punctuation. We just do another rule here, li, curly braces, and this time we're going to say color is orange. So the reason we're doing this is I want to show you that this li selector, it doesn't just select one, it selects all li's. So we refresh, all three of them are now orange. Likewise with the H1, if we had multiple H1s, so I'll just add 3, they would all be purple. One other thing I'll show you while we're here is if I defined another style for H1 afterwards, and I say it should be blue, it turns blue. All of them turn blue. And so this gets at something that we'll learn a lot more about, which is what happens when there is conflicting style information. And in this case, we change them all to be purple, and then afterwards we change them all to be blue. So the one that came later won the battle, I guess. Okay, so the problem with what we've just been doing though, our CSS looks fine, but unfortunately it's still in our HTML. And I just got done saying a few minutes ago, we want to separate our HTML and our CSS. We don't want them to be connected. We want them to be connected. We don't want the CSS to be nested inside our HTML. So functionally, it works exactly the same way. We won't see any visual difference. But what we actually want to do is use a link tag. So what a link tag lets us do is write our CSS in a totally separate file and then connect it with a link tag inside of our head, which will basically go get the contents of that file and style everything in our HTML given the contents of that file. So to write that, we can either start by making a new file, and we're going to put our CSS in here. So I'm going to save it, and I'm just going to call it app.css. You could call it whatever you want, but it needs to be .css. And I'm putting it in the same directory as my HTML file. The next thing that I'm going to do is just define a few styles in here. So H1's, let's say color is red, and LI's color is green. And while we're here, let's change H4 as well, color purple. Great. So we have CSS defined here. Of course, and I'm going to comment out this for now. Of course, though, they're not connected right now. So we made a file, but it's not connected. So to do that, we need to use the link tag. So I like to just type link and then hit tab. And you can see that there's this important attribute that Sublime Text wants us to fill out, which is called href. And it works just like the href on an anchor tag in that we give it a URL. We give it a place to find the file. So in this case, this file is just called app.css. So we just write app.css, save, and refresh. Now you can see we have red H1s, a purple H4, and green LIs. So that's all we're going to do as far as styling for now. So to recap here, the first thing that we discussed is using the style attribute to add style inline, which looks like this. Style equals, and then give it a property. And this is a bad idea for two reasons. The first of which is that we don't want to clutter our HTML with a bunch of styles. We want them to be separate. And the second reason is that it's a pain if we want to change things. This is a lot of duplication. If we want to make all three H1s red, we have to copy that code to 3 different places. The next thing that we learned about was using the style tag. And the style tag lets us write CSS inside of our HTML, and it works well. It does let us use the CSS syntax where we can select all H1s at once. The problem with it is just that we don't want to put our CSS directly in our HTML. But you will use this occasionally if you're just debugging something, you want to quickly add some styles, you don't want to make a new file and connect it, you're just going to delete it afterwards. So that's really the time where I use it, is just for quick demonstration purposes. But what we actually want to use is the link tag. The link tag is just a reference to another file. So we made a file, filled it with styles, it needs to end with .css. save it, and then connect it with the href attribute, and that's all we need to do. One thing I forgot to mention is that you definitely want to put link tags and styles in your head. That's really the point of the head. It's where you put the stuff that isn't actually on the page, not the elements, but things that have to do with those elements. So fonts that you're including, style sheets, and then eventually JavaScripts.